Today, part 2 of our discussion on the humanitarian crisis facing at least 3 African countries and Yemen. I'm Femi OK.
I'm Malika Bilal. How do you make the world care about millions on the verge of starvation? The UN says more than 8 million people in Somalia and Nigeria are at risk of going hungry.
In Somalia, the drought-prone country has seen crops and livestock wither away, and with it, livelihoods. Somalia has also been battling the armed group Al-Shabaab for over a decade. Joining us to discuss in Khartoum, in Sudan, we have Mohammed Idris, Executive Director for the American Relief Agency for the Horn of Africa. In Lagos, Nigeria, Kanayo Nwanze is former president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And back with us in Rome, Italy, Bettina Lucia, Chief Spokesperson for the World Food Programme in North America. And in Geneva, Dr. Rick Brennan is Director of Emergency Operations at the World Health Organization. Mohammed Idris, you've been planning for the worst as an organization. You were planning before everybody was saying, this is a disaster. What did you do?
Thank you for having me first. And you know, we always, we plan, but we always get surprised as well. The international community, I think, have made progress in monitoring the signs of drought and famine, and we become more able to predict when famine can hit an area. I think our problem is in responding to that and making the right decision and in the right time. I think as an organization, we have been founded by the East African community in the United States. So we are close to home with our hearts, and we know we speak the language and we understand the culture. And we have been seeing this actually for a long time. But always the problem is when the crisis reach this point of famine and starvation, that the response becomes slow because people want to see the images of thousands of people in the mainstream media like Al Jazeera and BBC and CNN in order to believe what is happening and then respond. And this is a dilemma that we are facing as NGOs, and I think the UN agencies, that just people and NGOs respond in the wrong time. So we need to improve that. We need to really work and build on the monitoring system that have been working very well since the previous famines that have been in this part of the world. So one of the things right now we are doing, and actually I just came from a trip to Somalia and Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya. I really visited these hard-hit area with the severe drought. People are devastated there, especially nomad people. Massive death of livestock. They witness some of them like reach 60%, in some area 90%. I met some families who told me like there was 200 goats for them, and now they have only 10 or 15. So the crisis is an issue. For us, what we are trying to do, we always advocate for early intervention and try to make those communities more resilient for the drought. The drought is becoming more and more permanent phenomena. It's not coming only as a temporary. It's becoming more and more a continuous phenomena, and we need to deal with it like that.
Mohammed, I hear what you're saying, and I want to share what one member of our community and other volunteers are trying to do about it, because you mentioned the previous drought, 2011, when we saw these famine-like conditions in Somalia. This is Abdi Ado, and he's talking to us out of Sweden, and he is someone who works on an app designed to help the victims of drought. Have a listen.
The platform Abaraha, which means drought in Somali, is the first ever crisis mapping platform built for Somalia. It was launched March 2017. The platform provides relief responders with information that allows them to connect with drought victims so they can render aid faster and more effectively. The platform collects and provides data through text, phone calls, emails, and social media alerts. The platform enables relief organizations to visualize where and what type of urgent needed in the country. It enables also relief organizations to plan and respond very effectively that otherwise would have taken much time and energy for them.
So the app he's talking about is pulled up on my screen here. You can see it. It's crisis mapping, and you can see the different areas where people either need help or are offering it. If you click on one of them, you'll get to something like this. This is the Dr. Hawa Abdiya Foundation. It's a healthcare, feeding center, and water distribution center, and you can see little pictures there. So clearly, this is one of the lessons Mohammed learned after the 2011 drought. But do you think on a wider scale, those lessons have been learned?
I think we are better this time than previous time, and also the context of the region is different. Somalia today is much better in terms of the conflict. There are large part of Somalia are stable. The government is taking over and becoming more stronger than before. And I visited Mogadishu in 2011. In terms of security, is much better right now, but I believe it's still we need to do a lot, especially looking at the big picture. It's still our focus on helping during crisis. We need to move from the crisis stage to an early planning and making this area resilient to the severe drought that's happening and becoming more and more permanent.
Sure.
Mohammed, let me just chime in there.
Yeah, Bettina, go ahead.
Chime in there because I think that's a really important point. How much the international community, both the big UN organizations and Somalians have learned, how much better our response is this time around than it was in the famine in 2011. We've been warning about this for a long time. We've been preparing for a potential famine for a long time. And it's a totally different ballgame than it was in 2011. I mean, and you know, these things are helping. Mobile phones are helping in various ways. On one side, for example, we as the aid organization with the World Food Programme, people who need help. We can do surveys, we can get information of where they are, what they need. We have data that are top-notch, probably world-class around the world, where we can see exactly what will happen, where we can predict things that will happen soon. And the other thing is cash. What we at the World Food Programme are doing is, on one side, food in places where, you know, in rural areas where people are really going hungry, but in urban areas or in areas close to cities, they can get e-vouchers or they can get cash, and they can buy the food that's on the market, all of this stabilizing the economy and being faster. But we have avoided so far the famine in Somalia because we learned so many lessons, because we prepared so much, and because the whole international community with the partners on the ground is working closely together.
See, 10 years ago, I had a totally different job, and I was an international weather forecaster, and I would look at the Horn of Africa during the rainy season and there would be no rain 1 year, and then another year, and then another year. After about 3 or 4 years, you're thinking it's not going to rain. So Kanayo, how do you prepare for that? When you see an area that used to have rain, what should farmers in that region be doing?
Well, thank you very much, Femi. I believe that the situation that you just referred to is one that we, in the international community, is quite aware of. And in recent years, the impact of climate change has actually increased, particularly in rural areas, in rural communities. And when you come to see the fact that most rural populations depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. So when a community or a family is deprived of rainfall 2, 3, 4 years in succession, there is very little that they can do. Now, but there are countries that have gone through similar experiences. And one example I will cite is Ethiopia. We only have to go back to what happened in the 80s. In Ethiopia, depended on band aid. Now, the reference that was made to the drought of 2011 and, of course, the drought of 2014, Ethiopia did not suffer as much damage or losses as most of the other countries in the Horn of Africa. Why is that? Because in that period of time, the government invested massive investment in irrigation, providing water resources to rural communities, and invested massively in agriculture. Mm. And so rural communities were able to provide water for their cattle, for their livestock, and were able to irrigate their the domestic farms.
So they were ready. So they were ready for the hard times.
They were ready. So yeah. Basically, when governments experience consecutive years of drought, and their rural communities are not able to survive the consequences of such extended drought, there is a missing link. The missing link there is the failure for long-term investment in rural development.
Drought after drought after drought makes it harder.
So is it denial? Are we talking about denial here? Is the government just thinking it's going to rain, it will eventually rain?
Well, but if you say that you're going to have year 1 there was no rain, year 2 there's no rain, year 3 there's no rain, and year 4.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously,
Climate's changed.
When I was at ISAD, we were the first institution that established an adaptation mechanism, a program that addressed smallholders' ability to adapt to climate change. We call it ASAP, Adaptation to Smallholder Agriculture. And this provided information, new technical climate information, weather information to farmers, provided them with new technologies, access to financial services, so they can build their assets.
So what you're telling, so what I'm hearing here, I'm going to bring in a new voice here, can I? And I'm going to come back to you because we're going to talk about Nigeria specifically. But what I'm hearing is that there are ways to mitigate famine or drought. It doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to happen. All right, so let's go down on the ground. I actually want to take you into the field so you know what it's like. I want to share some stories with you. I want to go to Nahuel Arenas. He is the humanitarian director of Oxfam America, and he is in Somaliland. Nahuel, where are you exactly? Somewhere with amazing Wi-Fi.
I'm connecting from Hargeisa in Somaliland.
Right. Tell us about your journey. So, what are you doing?
Yeah, I've been visiting the areas where Oxfam is providing clean water and ensuring access to sanitation, and also distributing cash to families so they can buy food and items of first necessity. As the colleague have expressed, the magnitude and the human cost of this emergency really cannot be overstated. I met a man yesterday, he was 80 years old, and he told me that this was the worst drought in his lifetime. You know, I've been looking at the wells and been looking at the reservoirs. The level of water is really getting lower and lower. This is really critical. The rains in April and May were poor, and the next rains, even if they are great, they still will not be enough to contribute to reduce the elevated risk of famine and the high level of malnutrition. And as we were starting to discuss with the colleagues here in Somaliland, you know, many people depend on their livestock. This is the rural areas are mainly pastoralists, and you know, I heard stories of you know, a man that had 60 camels, now he's left with one. A woman that had 400 goats, now it's left with 30. So what we are talking about is really, perhaps this is the new norm. So we really have to think on more different ways of diversifying livelihoods, different options, be creative, look at you know, opportunities in fisheries, in poultry, in agriculture, and this entails a huge change in habits, in skills, but it also needs a huge investment going forward. Unfortunately, This crisis has been largely overlooked, and we need more efforts like this program to ring the alarm. For example, in the US, for the first time, 8 of the largest humanitarian organizations, we are joining forces to launch a joint appeal that begins this Monday to raise awareness and funds. It's called the Global Emergency Response Coalition, and this is really an effort to break through. The funding level is really low. The UN humanitarian appeal is asking for $1.5 billion for Ethiopia, and so far 37% of that has reached the grant. And even the US, who has pledged 640 million additional in the G20, well, that money is not on the ground yet.
Right. How long does it take? How long does it take from how long does it take from a pledge to the money actually getting to people?
Well, you know, particularly the US has been very slow since Congress approved.
Now, just tell us the time. Is it a year? Is it 2 months?
Well, it
3
took
weeks?
months and months. We should have started. The humanitarian community should have started last year to respond to this drought, and many organizations, you know, have only started in February.
Okay.
Maybe just give
Go ahead.
give another perspective on famine. I mean, we've heard a lot about the issues related to malnutrition and livelihoods and farming and so on. But by definition, famines are also public health emergencies. So in the 2011 famine in Somalia, 260,000 people died. The vast majority of those were children. The vast majority of those children actually died from easily preventable diseases such as malaria, diarrhea, pneumonia, measles, and so on. So one of our big priorities in all of these settings as well is to rapidly scale up coverage of essential health services. And, you know, I don't think we're going to see the same death tolls from Somalia this year, in part because we are expanding coverage of health services and really targeting kids in particular with vaccination campaigns, with management of cholera. There are significant outbreaks of cholera in 3 of the famine-affected or pre-famine-affected countries right now of Yemen, South Sudan, and Somalia. So scaling up access to clean water, to cholera treatment centers is absolutely vital. And then just extending basic health services this is life-saving. So we can't forget that dimension of famine as well. I would add another factor that is being overlooked in a number of these settings. I was recently up in South Sudan, and I had a colleague in Somalia, and we exchanged stories which are almost identical. We visited communities affected by the famine and the conflict. In each of the communities we visited, there were essentially no men. Because of the fighting, the men had left, and exposing the women. Both communities, it was just the women and the children left. Again, happening in Somalia and South Sudan, and exposed to violations, to gender-based violence, sexual violence. There's a real gender dimension to these crises as well that we can't overlook.
And Rick, you know, Rick knows well that these are not just those areas as well. They're also in northern Nigeria, which I want to bring into the conversation now. Northeast Nigeria, to be specific, the population there is facing a severe food shortage, and that's a result of the ongoing fight against the armed group Boko Haram. So, of course, our community has a lot to say about this. This is a tweet we got from Hajo, who says, with poverty and corruption in Nigeria, citizens rely on individual efforts to support those in crisis, i.e., NGOs. He goes on to say there's no guarantee that such support will get to those in need. And most often, most of it is diverted and stolen due to corruption. Kanayo, do these tweets accurately, in your view, represent what you see going on in Northeast Nigeria?
Well, you know, in fact, the situation with the northeastern part of Nigeria is one which is really unfortunate, because it is, again, one of those man-made situations which have escalated and grown out of proportion, and has been a major challenge for the government of Nigeria as well as for the international community. We all know that the biggest challenge that we have in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is one that is basically one of poor leadership, poor leadership at the highest levels of government, poor governance, corruption, and the lack of the rule of law.
You say that Kanayo, you say that so comfortably. This is damning. This is damning for the continent. Well, leadership, this is commitment, lack of vision.
It is a reality.
How do you fix it?
It is.
How do you fix it? This is all man-made.
Well,
this is like these leaders could choose to actually behave in a different way, then we wouldn't all be sitting here today for 2 shows.
Well, now, when you consider the fact that Africa is what, if not the richest continent in the world, Africa is endowed with resources, natural resources. Africa has the richest agricultural lands. Africa has over 60% of all available uncultivated agricultural land. Africa has mineral resources, from diamond to gold to bauxite, you name it.
Yeah, and shall I tell you what else Africa has? Looking here at my laptop, now, 3 areas of the 3 countries which are so stricken with famine conditions right now. What you've just said, there's a big disconnect. Mohammed Idris is smiling as you're listening to that. Do you see this disconnect too, Mohammed?
Yes, I think this is the reality my colleague talked about in Nigeria. I mean, we see that in many areas, unfortunately. And this is one of the big problems. You mentioned the question that you raised before, what we can do regarding with the little rain that is there. And I want to connect this question to the question you just asked me. I think if we deal with the drought as a permanent phenomena, because climate change in that part of the world is becoming more and more clear, the relief project that we do, the relief program that we do in the Horn of Africa, are between 2 streams, 2 extremes, either drought relief or flood relief. So climate change is really clear in that part of the world. And unfortunately, Africa is paying the price of something that it did not contribute to. But scientists are predicting that it's going to be hotter, it's going to be more famine, it's going to be more drought. Right. And I think we need to talk about the solutions. And one of the solutions for the question that you ask about, with the little rain that we are getting or the poor rain that we are getting, what we can do. And I think that's a critical question, because there is rain that is coming from time to time, but it's not captured. The rain is not captured. Sometimes we see in an area where a rain come and it will be flushed to the ocean. There is no infrastructure in these areas where at least hold the water for some time so that livestock cannot die, so that people can at least fill the gap between, the season and the other season. So water harvesting really is something we need to work on. This is something very important. We need to support the infrastructure of this area so that we can build them. NGOs need to move from the conventional projects like food basket and water tracking.
So I like that you I like that you said that, because here's someone who says they are doing just that. Of course, it's the FAO. This is Abu Bakr, who tweets in, "We at FAO Emergencies are supporting women with 2-track cash and livestock, which allows affected people to access food and rebuild their livelihoods." But so a non-conventional solution, what do you make of it, Noel?
Well, there are many solutions that are, connect to local practices. For example, we are supporting communities with our partners, because we are working with great partners on the ground, rehabilitating local water storage systems that they have here in Somaliland that are called burka. And those are great ways to conserve for water conservation and for the animals. But most importantly, it's not just about the water, but it's also about the quality of the water. And that needs a change of habits as well.
Thank you, guests, for your insights, for talking about 4 countries around the world that are all experiencing famine conditions. We really appreciate you being part of this 2-part special. Noel, Rick, Bettina, Kanayo and Mohammed, we really appreciate your time today. Take care, everybody.